The attack on Mers El Kébir on 3rd of July 1940 during the Second World War was a British naval attack on neutral French Navy ships at the Navy base at Mers El Kébir near Oran on the coast of French Algeria. The attack was the main part of Operation Catapult, a British plan to neutralise or destroy neutral French ships to prevent them from falling into German hands after the Allied defeat in the Battle of France. The British bombardment of the base killed 1,297 French servicemen, sank a battleship, and damaged 5 other ships, for a British loss of 5 aircraft shot down and 2 crewmen killed. The attack by air and sea was conducted by the Royal Navy after France had signed armistices with Germany and Italy, coming into effect on the 25th of June. Background. After the fall of France in 1940 and the armistice between France and Nazi Germany, the British War Cabinet was apprehensive about control over the French Navy. The French and German navies combined could alter the balance of power at sea, threatening British imports over the Atlantic and communications with the rest of the British Empire. In Article 8, Paragraph 2 of the armistice terms, the German government solemnly and firmly declared that it had no intention of making demands regarding the French fleet during the peace negotiations, and there were similar terms in the armistice with Italy, but they were considered by the British to be no guarantee of the neutralisation of the French fleet. Churchill ordered that a demand be made that the French Navy should either join with the Royal Navy or be neutralised in a manner guaranteed to prevent the ships falling into Axis hands. At Italian suggestion, the armistice terms were amended to permit the French fleet temporarily to stay in North African ports where they might be seized by Italian troops from Libya. The British made a contingency plan, Operation Catapult, to eliminate the French fleet in mid-June, when it was clear that Philippe Pétain was forming a government with a view to ending the war, and it seemed likely that the French fleet might be seized by the Germans. The Ultimatum. The British tried to persuade the French authorities in North Africa to continue the war or to hand over the fleet to British control. A British admiral visited Oran on the 24th of June, and Duff Cooper, Minister of Information, visited Casablanca on the 27th of June. The French Atlantic ports were in German hands, and the British needed to keep the German surface fleet out of the Mediterranean, confine the Italian fleet to the Mediterranean, and to blockade ports still under French control. The Admiralty was against the attack on the French fleet. In case the ships were not sufficiently damaged, France declared war, and the French colonies would be less likely to defect. The Royal Navy lacked the ships to permanently blockade the French naval bases in North Africa and keep the Atlantic approaches open, which made the risk of the Germans or the Italians seizing the French capital ships too great. Because the fleet in Toulon was well guarded by shore artillery, the Royal Navy decided to attack the base in North Africa. The most powerful group of French warships was commanded by Admiral Marcel Brunot-Gensoul at Mers El Kébir in French Algeria, and it was here that Admiral James Somerville, commander of Force H, based in Gibraltar, was ordered to deliver an ultimatum to the French, the terms of which were contrary to the German-French armistice. Somerville passed the duty of presenting the ultimatum to a French speaker, Captain Cedric Holland, commander of the carrier HMS Ark Royal. Gensoul was affronted that negotiations were being conducted by a less senior officer and sent his lieutenant, Bernard Dufay, which led to much delay and confusion. As the negotiations continued, it became clear that agreement was unlikely. The French made preparations for action, and 42 aircraft were armed and made ready for takeoff. Removing the fleet to US waters had formed part of the orders given by Darlan to Gensoul in the event that a foreign power should attempt to seize his ships. Operation Catapult. The British force consisted of the battlecruiser HMS Hood, battleships HMS Valiant and Resolution, and the aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal, plus an escort of cruisers and destroyers. Despite the approximate equivalence of forts, the British had several decisive advantages. The French fleet was anchored in a narrow harbour, and despite the unequivocal terms of the ultimatum, did not expect an attack and was not fully prepared for battle. The main armament of the Dunkirk and Strasbourg was grouped on their bows and could not immediately be brought to bear. The British capital ships, with their 15-inch guns, also fired a heavier broadside than the French ones. Before negotiations were formally terminated, British Fairey Swordfish planes, escorted by Blackburn skewers, were dispatched from the Ark Royal to drop magnetic mines in the path of the French ship's route to sea. This force was intercepted by French Curtiss H-75 fighters. One of the skewers was shot down by French fighters and crashed into the sea, killing its two-man crew, the only British fatalities in the action. A short while later, on Churchill's instructions, the British ships opened fire against the French. The British opened fire at extreme range on the 3rd of July, 1940, at 17:54. The French eventually replied, but ineffectively. The third salvo from the British force, and the first to hit, resulted in a magazine explosion aboard Bretagne, which sank with 977 of her crew dead at 18:09. After some 30 salvos, the French ships stopped firing. Meanwhile, the British force altered their course to avoid fire from the French coastal forts. Provence, Dunkirk, and the destroyer Mogador were damaged and run aground by their crews. Strasbourg managed to escape with 4 destroyers. As these 5 ships made for the open seas, they came under attack from a flight of bomb-armed swordfish from Ark Royal. The French ships responded with anti-aircraft fire and shot down 2 of them, and their crews were rescued by the destroyer HMS Wrestler. The bombing attack had little effect, and Somerville ordered his forces to begin pursuing at 18:43. The British cruisers Arethusa and Enterprise reported engaging a French destroyer. At 20:20, Somerville called off the pursuit, feeling that his ships were ill deployed for a night engagement. After weathering another swordfish attack at 20:55 without damage, Strasbourg reached the French port of Toulon on the 4th of July. Subsequently, on the 4th of July, the British submarine HMS Pandora sank the French Aviso Rigaud de Genouilly, sailing from Oran. That night, French Air Force bombers carried out a retaliatory raid against the British fleet at Gibraltar to minimal effect. Since the British believed that damage to Dunkirk and Provence was not serious, British Fairey Swordfish aircraft from HMS Ark Royal raided Mers El Kébir on the morning of the 6th of July. One torpedo hit the patrol boat Terre-Neuve, which was moored alongside Dunkirk, and was carrying a supply of depth charges. Terre-Neuve quickly sank, and its charges triggered a large explosion, causing serious damage to Dunkirk. The last phase of Operation Catapult was an attack on the 8th of July by aircraft from the carrier HMS Hermes against the French battleship Richelieu at Dakar. In response to the actions at Mers El Kébir and Dakar, the French Air Force launched retaliatory bombing raids on British targets in Gibraltar, including a half-hearted attack on the 14th of July, when many bombs landed in the sea, and heavier raids on the 24th and 25th of September. Aftermath. At Mers El Kébir, 1,297 French sailors were killed, and about 350 were wounded. 2 British aircrew were also killed. Relations between Britain and France were severely strained for some time, and the Germans enjoyed a propaganda coup. British Admiral Somerville was not enthusiastic about the action, saying that it was the biggest political blunder of modern times and will rouse the whole world against us. We all feel thoroughly ashamed. Although it did rekindle Anglophobic feelings in France, the action demonstrated Britain's resolve to continue the war alone and rallied the British Conservative Party around Churchill, although Prime Minister Churchill was not then party leader. Churchill later declared the action meant that for high government circles in the United States, there was no more talk of Britain giving in. Harold Nicholson reported the House of Commons to have been fortified by Churchill's report of the action. The French ships in Alexandria, under command of Admiral René-Émile Godefroy, including the old battleship L'Oran and 4 cruisers, were blockaded by the British in port on 3rd of July and offered the same terms as at Mers El Kébir. After delicate negotiations, conducted on the part of the British by Admiral Cunningham. The French admiral agreed on the 7th of July to disarm his fleet and stay in port until the end of the war. They stayed there until they eventually joined the Allies in 1943. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, then please give it a like, and for more amazing tales and thrilling stories, don't forget to subscribe to Uncovered Secrets. Also, hit the bell icon to stay notified for every release.